The sky over Cape May was streaked in watercolor pinks and golds, the kind of evening that whispered promises of peace. Sabrina Torres, 35, smoothed her black satin dress as she stepped into the candlelit dining room of the resort's private restaurant, heart fluttering with the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this weekend could save her marriage. Her husband, Damien, an architect known for designing perfect spaces, had chosen this place to reconnect. They hadn't been alone like this in months. As the waiter poured their wine and flickering votives warmed the space between them, Sabrina allowed herself to believe this could be a turning point. Then came the voice, sharp, familiar, like glass cracking beneath her heels. "Why wasn't I invited?" All heads turned. There she stood, Vivian Walsh, Damien's mother, cloaked in perfume and entitlement, her silk shawl sliding off one shoulder as she glared at them from the entrance like a queen denied her throne. Sabrina froze, her stomach turning to stone. Vivian strode forward, unapologetic, claiming space that wasn't hers. "You knew I wanted to try this place," she hissed. Sabrina looked to Damien, praying for boundaries, for a spine, for her husband. Instead, he pulled out a chair. "Just sit, Mom. It's fine." That's when something inside Sabrina shattered. She rose, calm but burning, and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You two enjoy, because I'm done." And then she walked out. Not just from dinner, from everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Before all of this, before the silence, the lies, the broken promises, I was the kind of woman who believed love could fix things. My name is Sabrina Torres. I'm 35, and I run a nonprofit that helps women reclaim their power after emotional trauma. Funny how I could help strangers find their voice while slowly losing mine in my own home. I met Damien Walsh at a charity gala in Philadelphia. He was charming, thoughtful, a soft-spoken architect with a crooked smile and a fondness for sketching buildings on napkins. We talked about art, about legacy, about how homes hold stories, and 2 years later, I thought we'd start writing ours together. In the beginning, things were easy. He made me laugh. He asked questions. He noticed when I changed my perfume. And then came Vivian. From the first handshake she measured me, my clothes, my height, even my laugh. "You're taller than I imagined," she said that day. And it never got better. Still, I tried. I remembered her birthday. I brought her flowers. I complimented her home even when she nitpicked mine. I baked for her even when she never said thank you. I wanted to be part of their family. I wanted to believe that if I loved enough, I'd earn hers. But no matter what I did, I was always the intruder, the outsider. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't building a life. I was auditioning for one. And the roles had already been cast. It wasn't one big thing that broke me. It was the steady drip of little ones, the kind of wounds you can't see from the outside. Vivienne never yelled, never threw plates or slammed doors. Her weapons were quieter, more precise. "You don't wear makeup? That's brave," she said once, eyeing me like I'd shown up in rags. Another time, at Thanksgiving, she leaned over the stuffing I'd made from scratch and whispered, "Next time, you can just use my recipe. It's less soggy." She was always smiling when she said these things, always hiding daggers and compliments. Once, she let herself into our home using the spare key Damien gave her without asking me. I was in a robe, hair wet, mascara smudged. She looked me up and down and said, "I used to lounge like that too, before I learned how to be a wife." I asked Damien, begged him, to set boundaries. I didn't want a war. I just wanted space, respect. He would sigh, rub my back and say, "She means well, she's old school." No, she was controlling, strategic, and he let her be. He let her dig into our lives with her manicured fingers, and every time I asked him to push back, he stepped aside instead. That's what began to eat away at me. Not her comments, but his silence. because every time he stayed quiet, it felt like permission, and every time I swallowed my anger, I lost a little more of myself. The longer we were married, the more I realized our life wasn't ours. It was Vivian's. Every decision, from the color of the living room curtains to when we took our anniversary trips, somehow had to pass through her. At first, it seemed harmless. Damien would say, "I just want to make sure it doesn't clash with Mom's furniture," or "Let me check if she's busy that weekend before we book." I thought he was being thoughtful, but then it was everything. We couldn't buy a couch without Vivian's input. If I picked a wine, she'd suggest something more appropriate. She offered unsolicited advice about my wardrobe, my cooking, my hair. And Damien? He never once said, "That's enough." He'd smile, pat my knee, and change the subject. Slowly, I started to see that I was never really his partner. I was a guest in a house she designed, literally and figuratively. She had opinions on our finances, on whether I should work fewer hours, on which friends of mine were too loud or a little much, and Damien absorbed it all like gospel. He didn't just love his mother, he deferred to her, trusted her word more than mine. I stopped decorating, stopped suggesting weekend plans, I stopped dreaming out loud, because every idea I offered was either redirected or dismissed. And the worst part? He didn't even notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. Either way, the marriage I thought I was building was already cracked straight through the foundation. Damien said he wanted to make things right. Just us, he promised, handing me the printed itinerary for the couple's retreat. 3 nights, oceanfront suite, a wine-paired dinner at the resort's restaurant, the same place we stayed during our honeymoon. I wanted to believe him, so I leaned in. I packed the black satin dress he once said made me look like a woman in an old movie, took my time with my hair, even wore the soft red lipstick he liked. That evening, the restaurant was bathed in golden light, the hum of quiet conversation, the faint notes of a string quartet drifting in from the lobby. It felt like a memory from a better time. We ordered wine. We laughed about a wedding DJ who forgot the bride's name. For a moment, it felt like we were us again. Then a voice sliced through the warm glow like a blade dipped in ice. Why wasn't I invited? Every table went silent. I turned and saw her, Vivian, dressed in silk and indignation, standing tall at the entrance like she'd just been denied entry to her own home. "You knew I wanted to try this place," she snapped at Damien. "You said you weren't going anywhere tonight." My heart dropped. I looked at Damien, begging him silently to do something, anything. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, just pulled out a chair and said, "Just sit, Mom, it's fine." That's when I knew. It would never be just us. It had never been. I stood slowly, calmly, the room watching every move. "You two enjoy," I said, my voice steady but foreign to my own ears. "Because I'm done." Then I turned and walked out, past the tables, past the stunned stares, out into the night air that finally felt like mine. I didn't go home that night, or the next. I stayed at a friend's place in the city, letting the silence wrap around me like a shield. Damien texted once, "You overreacted." That was all I needed to know. There was no apology, no reflection, just the same casual dismissal that had threaded through every year of our marriage. When I finally walked through the door of our brownstone, he was on the couch, controller in hand, playing some game like nothing had happened. "You feeling better?" he asked, eyes barely flicking up. I didn't answer. Not then. Not later. I'd spent years trying to talk things through, begging him to understand, explaining how his mother's constant intrusions were eroding me. This time, I wasn't going to explain. I was going to execute. That night, while he slept soundly beside me like the world hadn't cracked open, I opened a new bank account in my name. The next day, I contacted a lawyer, quietly, methodically, I began separating our lives. I changed my direct deposit at work, secured a P.O. box, rented a one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city, and started taking photos of everything in the house I had bought with my own money. I didn't scream or cry. I strategized. I became still and observant, the way you do when you're preparing to leave a burning building without anyone noticing the smoke. Because I wasn't waiting for Damien to wake up anymore. I was already gone. It was a Thursday morning when everything shifted again. Quietly, almost absurdly, Damien was in the shower and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't even interested, until I saw the preview, a message from Vivian in their private group chat. "Did you tell her yet? She's going to find out eventually, you promised." My stomach dropped. I opened the thread, hands trembling. There were no other names in the chat, just Vivian and Damien. Message after message hinted at a secret I hadn't been meant to see. When Damien came out of the bathroom, towel slung low and steam trailing behind him, I held out his phone. "Read it," I said. He paled, sat down on the bed, put his face in his hands. Then the truth spilled out in fragmented sentences. 6 months ago, Vivian had moved into an apartment 2 floors below ours. She hadn't wanted to tell me. She just wanted to be closer, Damien mumbled, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was surveillance. It was manipulation dressed up as maternal love. She had watched me come and go, probably listened through the floorboards. And Damien? He helped her move in, carried her boxes, lied to my face every single day since. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just stood there, the truth settling over me like ash. She wasn't just in our marriage metaphorically. She was literally beneath us, every hour, every night. And Damien had invited her in. A week after the truth about Vivian's secret apartment came out, Damien asked to meet. "Just to talk," he said, "to keep things civil." Against my better judgment, I agreed, part of me still hoping he might finally take responsibility. We met at a quiet coffee shop near Rittenhouse Square, the kind of place with warm lighting and too many couples pretending to be okay. Damien looked tired, drawn. He slid a manila folder across the table. "These aren't legal papers," he said quickly, "just something to simplify things." I opened it and scanned the first page, and my heart clenched. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring my interest in the brownstone to Vivienne. "You won't have to worry about the place anymore," Damien said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're moving out anyway, right? This just makes it clean." I stared at him for 10 full seconds, trying to find some flicker of decency in his face. "You want me to hand over my home to your mother?" I asked, voice razor-sharp. He shrugged. "She helped with the down payment. It's complicated now." No, it wasn't complicated. It was calculated. I closed the folder slowly, slid it back toward him, and stood. This isn't a settlement. It's a setup. I walked out without another word and handed everything to my lawyer that same afternoon. Her jaw clenched when she saw it. "This isn't just shady," she said. "It's a trap. You're not divorcing a man. You're divorcing a mother-son business operation." Once my lawyer began digging, the truth unraveled faster than I could emotionally brace for it. What started with one shady quitclaim document exploded into a financial trail of quiet betrayals. I had always managed most of our household finances, utilities, groceries, even the mortgage payments. But what I didn't realize was that Damien had been siphoning small amounts of money to Vivian under labels like Mom's car repair, grocery reimbursement, and brunt. One transfer was for $1,100. Another was labeled Vivian Emergency, but there was no emergency. There was just entitlement. Then came the bombshell. When we purchased our brownstone, I'd paid the majority of the down payment, 87% to be exact. But somehow, Vivian's name had been added to the property title. My lawyer found out it had been slipped in through paperwork processed by a family friend at a now-defunct real estate office, someone Vivian insisted we use at the time for better rates. That same friend had quietly filed forms listing Vivian as a silent investor, giving her legal claim to my home. I had never seen that part of the paperwork, never signed off on it, but Damien had, so had Vivian, and they'd done it behind my back. That's when I stopped thinking of this as a failed marriage and started seeing it for what it was, a covert financial ambush. Every receipt, every transfer, every sneaky signature was another cut in the 1,000 bleeding me dry. Only now, I was documenting every one of them. Damien asked for one last dinner, just to talk through everything, he said. This time, the location was Vivian's townhouse. I almost said no, my gut twisted at the thought of sitting across from them again, but something in me needed closure. I needed to see them both try to spin their web with their hands shaking. So I went. I arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, and Vivian greeted me like nothing had ever happened. Her smile was too wide, her perfume too heavy. Everything about her reeked of rehearsed hospitality. Damien was already at the table, shoulders slouched, eyes dark from sleepless nights. Dinner began with forced small talk, each bite of roast feeling like gravel in my mouth. Then Vivienne cleared her throat. We wanted to talk about the condo, about what's fair. Fair, that word. She continued. You were never financially prepared to buy something like that. Damien and I made it happen. It only makes sense that we protect our investment. Damien gave a small, useless nod. I put my fork down, calm, controlled. You mean the way you both forged my name and tried to trap me with a fake settlement? Vivian's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. That's when I pulled out my own folder, the one my lawyer helped me build. I slid it across the table. Inside, bank statements, payment receipts, the document trail proving I paid 87% of the down payment. And then came the twist neither of them saw coming. From the hallway, a voice said, She's not being dramatic. She's telling the truth. Vivian's sister, Aunt Margot, stepped into the room. Turns out my lawyer had subpoenaed her for Vivian's financial records tied to a family trust. Tell her, Vivian, she said. Or should I? Vivian went pale. And suddenly, the silence was louder than any scream. The silence after Aunt Margot spoke was suffocating. Vivian's face contorted first with shock, then fury. I looked between them both, heart pounding but face calm. Tell me what? I asked. Margot didn't blink. The money Vivian used for the down payment wasn't hers. It came from a trust set up by her late husband, meant for future grandchildren. She forged documents to access it early. My stomach churned. Damien turned to his mother, voice trembling. Is that true? Vivienne didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then, like a dam breaking, the scene crumbled. Vivienne exploded. You're destroying this family, she shrieked at me, slamming her hand on the table. You brought an outsider into our lives, and now look what's happened. Damien stood suddenly, face red, voice louder than I'd ever heard it. You lied, Mom. You made me lie. You turned everything into a game I couldn't win. And then she slapped him. Right there, in front of the roast, and the shattered illusion of control, she struck her only son. He didn't react, just stood there, shaking, breath shallow, eyes lost. I gathered my folder, tucked it into my bag, and stood. You can keep your lies, I said quietly, but you're not keeping my life, my name, or my future. Then I walked out of her house, out of their chaos, and into a life that, for the first time in years, was mine alone. Behind me, I heard no footsteps, just the sound of everything finally falling apart. 3 months have passed since that final dinner, and I'm learning how to breathe again. My new apartment is small, no marble countertops, no sprawling staircase, but it's mine. The first night I slept there alone, I cried. Not because I missed Damien, but because the silence wasn't laced with tension. It was just quiet. Safe. I cook dinner now without being criticized for how I chop onions. I light candles just because I like the scent. There's no second-guessing my every move. No invisible audience watching from a balcony 2 floors down. Therapy has become a sacred space. 1 hour a week where I untangle the damage, not just from Damien, but from the version of myself that stayed too long, kept too quiet, gave too much. The brownstone is locked in legal limbo, under investigation for property fraud. Vivian's accounts were frozen, and Margot agreed to testify if needed. Damien sent one final email. A half apology, half confession about not knowing the truth, about being manipulated too. I didn't respond, because I'm not responsible for healing the men who watched me drown and called it loyalty. I signed the divorce papers, changed my last name back, and closed that chapter without a single. Now, I sip coffee on my tiny balcony and feel the morning sun on my face. No shadows, no ghosts, just me. Whole, healing, and finally free from a story that was never really mine to begin with, but one I reclaimed, page by page, until I wrote the ending myself. If you had told me a year ago that I'd walk away from a marriage, a home, and a life I helped build, I would have laughed, politely, nervously, like I always did when something cut too close to the truth. But the thing about slow betrayal is that it teaches you patience. It teaches you to sit in silence long enough to hear yourself think again. And what I finally heard was this: I deserve better. Not louder, not messier, just better. Someone who doesn't need to be asked to choose me. Someone who doesn't confuse control with care, loyalty with silence, or love with obligation. People ask if I regret walking out that night in Cape Mee, in front of all those strangers, leaving Damien and Vivian in stunned silence. My answer is no. I regret every time I didn't walk out sooner. I regret every time I smiled through the pain, made excuses, lowered my standards, and told myself, this is just how family is. No. That's not family. That's dysfunction dressed as tradition. To anyone listening, to the woman quietly shrinking herself at every dinner, to the partner waiting for a sign that never comes, this is your sign. You don't need a betrayal big enough to make headlines. Sometimes the quiet erosion of your voice is enough. And when you finally decide to leave, you don't need to slam the door. You just need to close it and lock it behind you. Because healing doesn't start with rage. It starts with one brave step in the other direction. And trust me, when the silence that follows is yours, and only yours, it will be the loudest, most powerful sound you've ever heard. You don't have to be chosen to matter. You just have to choose yourself. The lesson from this story is simple but profound. Love without boundaries is not love. It's surrender. Sabrina's journey shows that kindness, patience, and loyalty mean nothing if they're not met with respect. For years she tried to be the perfect wife, the understanding daughter-in-law, the woman who kept the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace. It's compliance. The story reminds us that when someone repeatedly chooses others over you, they are showing you who they are. And when they expect you to stay despite the hurt, they are showing you who they think you are. The real power comes not from confrontation, but from clarity, the quiet strength to walk away, to protect your worth, and to start again without permission. Sabrina didn't leave because of one moment. She left because that moment revealed the truth she had been swallowing for years. The greatest takeaway is this: You are not obligated to stay small to make others comfortable. Not for love, not for family, not even for the dream you once had. Sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is walk away with your head held high.